Why don't we get started? Um, and so I'm Scott Stone of Glencoe Strategies, and very pleased to be here with the second installment of the Geothermal Heating and Cooling webinar series. This is an initiative to advance awareness and alignment around geothermal's role in economic development, energy security, and grid resilience, among other benefits. This is episode number 2. In our first episode, we explored the practical benefits of geothermal systems, including energy savings, reduced grid strain, real-world performance across residential, commercial, and community applications. Today, we are going to dig much deeper into utility partnerships and grid resilience, a timely topic as we look at, you know, uh, infrastructure modernization projects and the importance of consumer energy savings. And we're going to hear from a terrific collection of experts across the utility, engineering, and policy sectors on how geothermal systems are being integrated into utility operations, how they contribute to peak load reduction, and their role in reliable energy systems in both urban and rural settings. So without any further ado, why don't we get started with our first panelist, and very much appreciate David Poterson from Excel Energy, senior product developer specializing in energy efficiency, demand side management, and smart grid technologies. David, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So let's start with integrating geothermal heating and cooling into a utility's operations. How are you at Excel currently approaching this? How does it fit into your broader energy strategy?
Sure. Um, to start, there's two different uh, two different outlets for geothermal heating and cooling in the utility on the utility side from our perspective, right? There's the individual facility geothermal heating and cooling, and that is something that we would give a rebate for based on the efficiency of the system. We've had rebate programs in place for many years, so that would fit into our typical rebate structure. But then there's a whole nother outlet which we're just starting to develop and investigate and see if we can build a business model around, and that's the utility thermal energy network model. And in that model, the utility, we would own and operate all the below ground equipment. So all the pipes, boreholes, pumps, we would own and operate and finance all of that and charge, a monthly service fee for the customer. So each customer would only need to replace their equipment in their home or business in their facility and pay a monthly service fee to get all the benefits of this geothermal system. And that's specifically what I'm working on these days.
Great. And could we get into, and describe more about, peak load management and other benefits for the grid, Excel's perspective on how this contributes, especially during extreme heat and cold periods.
Yeah, absolutely. The peak load benefits are pretty undeniable. So there's the theoretical efficiency of pulling heat out of the ground instead of the air. That's based on physics, and that's a pretty rock solid number. In our service territory, the theoretical efficiency is roughly 2.4x. So you're going to get a lot more. You're going to get a lot more benefit pulling heat out of the ground than the air. But then on top of that is the real magic happens when you start interconnecting multiple customers on a single loop. Because on a broad stroke, most commercial customers are net cooling and most residential customers are net heating. When you put them together on a single geothermal system, they help each other. Each provides a service that the other needs. So in that sense, the peak demand, you already started from the most efficient HVAC system that currently exists. An individual ground source heat pump is the most efficient HVAC system you could currently buy. But then now that you network it and customers are helping each other, we've seen studies from Europe that show that the peak demand impacts um, could be potentially 45% greater in a network scenario. So we've seen some evidence that the energy and specifically peak demand impacts could really be magnified in a networked setting.
That's great. So lots of benefits, lots of reasons to do it. How about challenges and barriers? Technical, financial, regulatory. What are they that you're seeing, and how have you grappled with them and sought to overcome them?
Yeah. So lots of challenges. I'm not on the distribution planning side of the utility, so I'm sure there's technical challenges sort of integrating these systems with that. But that's not, I can't speak to that. What I can speak to very much is the business model and the customer side of the equation. And the biggest challenge really on that side all comes down to costs. Um, Costs, it's complicated to determine the cost benefit of systems like this. Um, and we want to make sure that we're looking at it through the right lens, right? On first pass, we're going to be trenching streets and putting new pipes in the ground, and that's super expensive. Any way you cut it, that's an expensive proposition. So on first pass, it looks like it may not be cost effective, right? Oh, it's too expensive to dig up the ground, putting pipes, like burying things. Um, but the lens that we're viewing it through is, at scale, could this be a solution that really benefits us, especially since we have a 2050 goal for a gas business to be net zero. So so that's what we're comparing it against. We're not comparing it against today. We're comparing it to the future. And we've already done that. We've already dug up the ground and put pipes in the ground. And that's what our gas business is. So that's been cost effective, right? That's been very successful for many years. Um, but you could imagine a world where the first time we did that, or the first time anyone did that, it would look like an incredibly expensive proposition, right? Before any gas system was in place, to dig up the ground, put pipes in the ground, and install it for the first 100 customers, it would look incredibly expensive. So that's the dichotomy that we're challenged with right now. Is the first one is always going to look super expensive, but can this be a cost-effective model in the future at scale? So that's what we're trying to evaluate. And we're all of this gets paid through customer utility bills. So we're trying to be prudent with our customers' money in this sense, right? We want to make sure that what we're doing makes the most sense.
Yeah, and so, that's a nice segue into what role utilities can play from a design and incentive program. I think particularly when you think about where, policy interventions could be limited or could invariably be more complicated than it might seem. Utilities have a lot of space to operate in terms of how they interact with customers, and how benefits can be shared. So tell us about, from Excel's perspective, your perspective, you know, uh, financing mechanisms, other incentives, program design. What does that look like?
Yeah, sure. So the short answer is this is exactly why utilities exist, right? Utilities exist to put very expensive infrastructure into the ground and finance it over very long periods of time in a way that's digestible to the consumer, and in a way that consumers couldn't do themselves. So we're probably one of the only entities in the world that love these long, decades long financing periods, right? That's what we're based off of. So I really believe that the utility model for this is the appropriate model. It's the best. It's the best uh, entity to be installing these. We've been doing that for forever, right? Customers don't install their own gas turbines and make their own power plants. We install central energy infrastructure that costs a lot of money, and we share it over a ton of customers, and everyone pays their little slice of the pie and gets the benefit of those economies of scale. And that's exactly what this is, right? If we It's the exact same approach. We're going to spend a lot of money, put a lot of infrastructure in the ground. It's going to be expensive, but then it's going to be in the ground for a very long time. We're going to spread it over a bunch of customers. And if everyone pays their slice, then everything hopefully works, right? We're still investigating. We don't have any answers yet, but we're pursuing it and we're seeing if we could make that business model work.
And I think to bring it full circle, um, absolutely, and that's a great way to put it. This is what utilities are sort of meant to do, designed to do. Um, Geothermal heating and cooling also isn't something like that's, you know, you wouldn't want to do otherwise. Quite the contrary, it's worth doing because of all the benefits you articulated. We're going to, with Kevin, I think, and Boyd, break down that even further. But it's something that that Excel and others, in the power sector would want to see more and more of, particularly going forward into, increasingly interesting, a future where you have more intermittent resources and, you might face other kinds of transmission issues and so forth. So being able to have geothermal heating and cooling to fall back on from a resilience and a stability standpoint has increasing value going forward.
Absolutely. So again, I'm not on the distribution planning team, so I can't speak to the real nuts and bolts of that, but that's a challenge, right? So when we're looking at um, there's some urban redevelopment projects. There's a project called River Mile that we're investigating in downtown Denver, which is an urban redevelopment project. And when you look at, and I'm just here sort of anecdotally from the distribution planning team, but the costs of delivering enough electricity to these new developments is gargantuan, right? We're talking distribution upgrades, potentially transmission upgrades. So this technology that could really lower all those electric peak demand, which is what we build our infrastructure to meet peak demand. So if you reduce peak demand, then we could build less infrastructure, less electric infrastructure. So this is very much reducing our need for electric infrastructure, and it's very much helping on the gas side too. And it's helping on the gas side in a couple ways. Um, we're looking at this really as what we call an NPA, non-pipes alternative. So a solution that is used to in place of upgrading or expanding the gas system, which is ironic because this is a pipe solution, but it falls into the same bucket of avoided expenditure on the gas system. So we're reducing electric peak demand, and then on the gas side, we could be reducing, installing this reduces any sort of peak gas demand um, issues. So we could retrofit a neighborhood or some customers and reduce some of the gas peak demand. And then going into the future, the real value of it is the way our gas business works and most utilities and our electric business too, is um, is that it's the maintenance of that system is paid in through each unit of energy that's sold. So we sell whatever, a gazillion units of gas, and half of that money that we get from that goes to the fuel of gas, and then half goes in to maintaining like our pipes network. And that's not firm numbers. I'm just giving an illustrative example. So a lot of the strategies that we are looking at to meet our net zero gas goals in 2050 rely on reducing consumption of gas. But if you keep reducing consumption of gas, but you still want gas there, then you have fixed maintenance costs. So the economics become troublesome if you reduce gas supply. But if we transition to this, and if our gas utility was installing geothermal systems as part of their business model, then they're still there's plenty of work for them to do. They're still installing pipes and maintaining pipes, and customers are still paying into a pipes network, but we're also decarbonizing. So it's really a win-win for us.
Mhm.
We're winning on the electric side, we're winning on the gas side, and the customer is winning because if everything works out, right, we're still investigating, but potentially um, everybody wins. The customer is going to get the most efficient heating and cooling system that exists in the world today by a large margin and not have to finance any of that themselves. They just pay a monthly service fee to the utility because we did all that financing for them. That's the utility model. So if it all works, it looks like it has the potential to be a real win-win-win for everyone.
Terrific. Well, David Boderson, thank you very much. And that actually sets up our next panelist quite well. Kevin Kitts of Kitts Works LLC, a professional engineer with more than 35 years of experience in the geothermal industry, focusing on district energy systems, underground thermal energy storage, and quantifying the grid value of geothermal heat pumps. And I'm sure, Kevin, lots more as well during those nearly 4 decades. I thought we could start with grid value quantification. I know you've thought deeply about this. You've done a lot of great work on it. Could you elaborate on, methodologies used in terms of determining, avoided capacity costs and just how this all pencils out and looks on paper?
Sure, yeah. Happy to do that. So first, from my perspective, every geothermal heat pump that gets installed lowers everybody else's cost of power. That's true for the next geothermal heat pump that gets installed on the grid, and it's true for the last building on the grid to get converted to geothermal heat pumps. And what that all means is that the grid is actually a more important customer for geothermal heat pumps than the building owners themselves, in my opinion. Um, and there, to answer the question about, well, how do you determine what the grid value is? I would say that there's no universally agreed way to do that. And I think that there's really three ways to go about it. The first and most accurate, it can really only be done by the utilities themselves, and that's to look at what happens to the cost of infrastructure if there's a mass deployment and retrofit of geothermal heat pumps across the grid. So they model how many power plants are going to get built if there's no geothermal heat pumps, and then what's the requirements if everybody has a geothermal heat pump, for example, and then that difference is the value of geothermal heat pumps. So that's an expensive, complicated process. It was done by the DOE and National Renewable Energy Lab. They published a report in December of 2023, which people can find quite easily. The next way is something that we can all do simply by looking at our utilities integrated resource plan and looking at what the utility is forecasting their load growth is going to be and what their infrastructure investments are going to be. And so if we more, as David just said, they're building infrastructure primarily to meet peak load. So if we basically divide those two numbers on a net present value basis, we can sort of arrive at what the utilities think their future cost of capacity is going to be, and we can use that as a metric for the energy cost savings that come from a geothermal heat pump. And last, which is the way I've been looking at it most recently, is a huge part of the cost of peak power is the gas turbines that serve peak load for only a few hours a year. So if we get rid of peak load through geothermal heat pumps, then we also can incrementally get rid of gas turbines, especially at large scale. And so from that, we just estimate the cost of a gas turbine using published data. And then looking at the geothermal heat pump industry, about a half a kilowatt per heating and cooling ton at peak. And so we get we get the number of kilowatts times the value of that kilowatts, and that's another way to determine the value.
That's great. Thanks, Kevin. And um, a very rich answer. I think I'm still decompiling, midway through. I'll catch up eventually. And we will be, sharing the recording, and we're going to try to summarize the webinar with the benefit of our experts here, if folks haven't been able to write all that down. But let's look at that from a different angle. So when you think about incentives, whatever they may be, forget kind of what they are at the moment, the justification of those incentives are all this give back or all these avoided costs and otherwise. Um, you know, how how would you sort of, go about thinking about, incentives for broader deployment of geothermal heating and cooling systems, given this way you've kind of structured the value to the grid as a whole?
Yeah, so when I look at it, I think that every geothermal heat pump for a single family home, let's say, has a reduced in present value terms. So, over the next 20 or 30 years, if we bring all those savings back to today, I think that every geothermal heat pump um, reduces grid cost by $8,000 to $20,000 per single family home. And there's times where I think it could be as high as $40,000 per home. So that's the amount of money that I think that each geothermal heat pump is worth. Now, there's a lot of different ways that that money could be distributed. So it could be used by Excel Energy, for example, David, to install network geothermal or to install standalone geothermal, or it could be offered as an incentive for individuals, or it could be offered as an incentive to companies that come in and do mass retrofits on, every house all the way down both sides of the street. Um, so so I think that how to deploy that money is there's a lot of different ways it could be done, but the bottom line is that that's in my opinion the value to all ratepayers on a grid from installing each geothermal heat pump. And as we look at those upper numbers, it could also potentially include the transmission, reduction in utility, the size of utility scale solar, smaller rooftop solar, as David just said, lower distribution costs, and less and smaller grid batteries as well. The last thing that geothermal heat pumps do in the way of lowering everybody's costs is that since at winter peak and at summer peak, they're using less electricity than other options, then they're using less of the expensive power on the grid. And when the temperatures are mild and it's heating season, they're using more inexpensive power. And when you electrify heating in this way with geothermal heat pumps, utilities spend less money on expensive power and they supply more low-cost power. That spreads their costs out, as David just explained, over more megawatt hours, which again lowers everybody else's costs on the grid. So these all can fold into the incentive and how utilities and PUCs can choose to implement it.
And I think that then would certainly, the goal would be then to drive, broader and I think more rapid deployment, because you're chasing these benefits both, to the grid and to everyone as a whole, but then to the individual homeowner, ratepayer, building owner, system owner, or what have you. Let's blend this in with thermal energy networks, TENS, a little bit. Uh, you know, maybe to get us started, we're going to come back to this in some other ways, but sort of what are they, and then how would you fit them into this discussion in terms of grid resilience, peak load reduction, and everything else.
Right. Well, I think I'm pretty much technology agnostic. I like to have a tool belt, and I like to pull the right tool out. I can beat a nail in with the handle of my screwdriver, but I'd prefer to use a hammer for that. And so that's the sort of the way I see thermal energy networks is that, in the couple of studies I've been involved in, they are of marginal benefit, if any benefit, over um, just standalone building geothermal heat pumps. In some environments, especially dense environments, urban environments with a lot of different load profiles, I think they could be really valuable. But the benefits that we're talking about, that David talked about, Boyd's going to talk about, I've been talking about, they're all independent of the mechanism of delivering heating and cooling energy to the heat pump. So thermal energy networks, TENS, are valuable in the right application, but the grid benefits are the same, maybe slightly greater with a 10, but they're essentially the same whether you're using a 10 or a standalone geothermal heat pump, in my opinion. There's certain exceptions. They can where 10s can be amazing, but those don't represent the vast majority of buildings in the US, in my view.
Yeah. So then zooming out and maybe starting to kind of come back full circle, your initial sentence, with us was, every geothermal heating and cooling system installed lowers everybody else costs of power. Thinking about it economically from a policy standpoint, and we'll get more into some of the policy nuances with Ryan at the end. Um, like, I mean, the value of that has got to be even exceed what appears on paper, right? Like there aren't too many other options, if any other options out there, where you can look at heating and cooling and actually see it throw off benefits that are well beyond, whether you're going to sweat or shiver when the weather changes. And I could ask you, just given your experience, the work you've done, to continue to expound even further on that, and what you think the industry could do to take this important USP forward and use it as it continues to grow.
Yeah, I think David hit really one of the key points, and that's that geothermal heat pump infrastructure needs to go into the rate base. And he's working on tens, but I think it's equally true for standalone geothermal heat pumps. It's 100, it's infrastructure that's going to last 50 to 100 years, and it's going to live way beyond the next three building owners, you know. So why not put that, and so that putting it in the rate base brings the benefit of geothermal heat pumps to all ratepayers over a long term, and it eliminates the barrier to entry that keeps individual homeowners from and businesses from choosing geothermal heat pumps. Um, so since it benefits all ratepayers, then it's justifiable to put it into rate base. And I think the challenge here is that I think PUCs and maybe even a lot of utilities are a little bit stuck on the idea that central infrastructure is the only infrastructure that they can invest in and into the rate base. And I think that we've developed new technologies that are distributed, and I think that if it benefits ratepayers, then it ought to go into the rate base, whether it's connected as a central system or as a standalone system. And geothermal heat pumps are, going to very most often be standalone systems in suburbia and, so on and so forth. So why not put that long-term benefit and have it be paid for by the people who are going to benefit over it for the long term? And that may take legislation, or PUCs may have the authority to do that already.
Terrific. Well, thank you, Kevin. This was great, and we're going to pivot now to Boyd Lee, outside the box geo. where he's the owner and a consultant with 42 years. So we're getting even more experience as we progress here. 42 years experience in electric co-ops, focusing on geothermal program deployment, utility partnerships. Boyd, welcome. So glad you could join us today.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thanks for asking.
So I thought we could maybe bob and weave and cover some different topics kind of all over the place. Let's start with a free loop program. Could you explain what a free loop program is and how it benefits utilities and how it benefits customers?
Absolutely. It directly attaches to Kevin's final words talking about rate basing with utilities. I mean, um, it is an outside the box, if you'll pardon the pun and my use of my own company name, but it is an outside the box way to look at successfully implementing geothermal heating and cooling into your utility infrastructure. Um, After many, many years of trying different ideas um, and with different cooperatives, I finally landed at a cooperative whose board and general manager really get it. They understand the value of the geothermal and what its impact is. And hopefully I'll get a chance here in a few minutes to really get into that dollar amount of that impact. But that's what led us to the free loop. We realized early on that the barrier to most homeowners um, was the cost of the loop. There's really not a lot of difference between the cost of the geothermal equipment and high efficiency air source equipment, but the difference was the loop. And so when faced with that extra 10 to 15 to $20,000 expense, people got cold feet. And so we decided to just take that out of the equation. And so we started offering free loops. The utility provided the expense to install the loop. So that made it a no-brainer decision then for many, many customers. And once we started that, our little small co-op started averaging about 100 systems a year installing, many years well more than that, 125 to 150. Now, that may not sound like a lot, but for a 27,000 meter cooperative, that's a huge amount. And we're to the point now after the previous 12 years, we've just about reached 10% saturation of our heating and cooling customers residentially. And it's a result of that free loop. And we'll get into it, I'm sure, in just a little bit, but the value of that free loop, the smallest portion goes to the customer. The real value is what it does to the utility bottom line.
Thanks for that, Boyd. Yeah, and maybe we could, get you to elaborate further, particularly given your own experience with co-ops in the past on, load factor improvement, peak demand reduction, what you saw from, rate design, and so forth. I mean, would love to really just, you've been at this almost as long as a loop will last in the ground. And so, what else kind of from your experience, given what we've been talking about, could you share with us today?
All right. Well, let's go into what that value is and how we discovered the method to make this thing work. I've already mentioned that there were barriers to the customer, and that's upfront costs. So once we took that out of the way, um, the next thing we had to come to terms with is, okay, we're putting in 125, 150 loops a year. That's a lot of money. That's about $1.5 million a year. Okay, if we're trying to expense that every year, we've got a budget for $1.5 million, which reduces other areas of the cooperative budget, obviously, by that amount. If you choose that way, we decided because we're a cooperative, everything we do um, benefits every single member. If we're doing our job, every decision we make on every program and so forth and so on has a benefit to every member through lower wholesale cost of power, therefore lower rates to them, or more stable rates longer term, different things of that nature. And so what we decided to do was apply a rider. Kevin mentioned rate basing, and we didn't actually put it into the kilowatt hour, but we put a temporary rider in place. And what that rider did is that temporarily borrowed the amount of money that it takes to make the investment throughout the year from our membership as a whole. And when you spread that to all of the kilowatt hours that you sell over a year, the impact of that rider is minuscule. For example, at our cooperative, CK Energy, we were able to spread $1.5 million a year in across the board to all of our kilowatt hours, and the rider amount was 0.0016 cents per kilowatt hour. And so, to the average homeowner, they don't see that impact. And but the results of that after a few years, it takes a little while because you're putting all these units in every year. They need to pile up before you can actually see the impact on the bottom line. But once they do, then it lowers the wholesale cost of power because of the load factor improvement across the board so much that you're giving them back through reduced power cost more than you're charging them in the rider. And so you do reach a point to where it's profitable all year, every year, regardless of the rider. And that snowballs. Each year that passes, your bottom line gets better. Your margins grow. As an example, we were able to over 12 years, we were able to shave 4 megawatts of peak power just with residential geothermal heating and cooling. Now, 4 megawatts to an XL, that's not a big deal, but to a 27,000 meter co-op, it's huge. And what it actually is $800,000 a year of additional margins because of the reduced demand only. Then there's also increased kilowatt hour sales because inevitably when you put geothermal in, you're replacing something else. And many times it's a propane furnace or a gas furnace or what have you. So there are additional kilowatt hour sales. And you throw those two things together, and CK Energy's measurable impact every single year from now on is $1.2 million in additional margins, not revenues, but margins every year, and it continues to grow. So ultimately, we currently have about 1,600 systems installed, and over a 30-year period of time, the value of that to the co-op and its membership, and this is through reduced wholesale cost of power, improved load factor, expanded capacity for other uses, different things of that nature. Those 1,600 systems are worth $35 million to the cooperative over a 30-year period of time. Now,
Those are great. Yeah.
that's outside the box, and that to me is what utilities. Forget all the rules that you think you need to follow, and follow this because it works.
And if I could segue to another aspect of that, which is what this means from like a workforce development standpoint. Something I know, we and you're down in Oklahoma. There's lots of other reasons why you're poking holes in the ground in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
But it's the same concept, same rigs in some respects. And what does broader geothermal heating and cooling deployment mean from an opportunity standpoint for young people with knowledge from the industry and the seeking to develop skills and so forth? How do you see that unfolding as this industry continues to grow?
Well, if utilities will absolutely get behind geothermal heating and cooling, like they should, the value to future job prospects is overwhelming. There's a lot of young men out here in the countryside that they don't want to go to regular college, university, things like that. They want to work in a trade. And this is a trade that they can get into and make a very handsome living. And it's good work. It's good hard work. Um, and the more of these that we put in, the more young fellas and young girls that want to can get into schools and learn how to become an HVAC contractor or go to drilling school, get on with a driller, eventually invest in their own, drilling equipment. It's really um, it's really limitless to the number of jobs if enough utilities are doing it. Now, if utilities don't get behind it, then there's only a certain number of HVAC contractors and drillers that it takes to put the current demand for systems in. But if we raise the demand, we will create jobs like crazy.
Yeah, and that, we're going to, for our next webinar, not yet scheduled, but we're going to look at, workforce development, job opportunities and whatnot. And, that it's true writ large from an HVAC, and water heating standpoint. But, with geothermal, you have some special features, namely the drilling aspect and getting into the ground, which has, obviously synergies and a lot of overlap with drilling for water, for oil and gas or whatever, and something that's distinct from broader, HVAC, contracting. And so something we're going to definitely explore later. But in the last bit of time we have Ryan Doherty, who's the executive director of the Geothermal Exchange Organization. And Ryan, we're gonna shortchange the policy discussion a little bit given the time. And so want to challenge you. And the thing is I know you're up for this because you've been living, breathing, eating, and sleeping the policy dimensions for geothermal heating and cooling, what the current situation is, what the outlook is, what's needed to continue to communicate and convey, these significant benefits to people, all across the country in their homes to power generators, both, big IOUs like Excel and then, the rural co-ops as well. So, in like 2 or 3 minutes or less. So no, not a tall order for you, I know. Let's see what you can do.
Well, thanks, Scott. There's so many things I could say in the wake of the great comments and insight from Dave and Kevin and Boyd. This has been kind of an inspirational discussion in a lot of ways because we're talking about this transitional pivotal moment in our nation's history, with something that comes along once every century or so, and we're facing these challenges, but also have great opportunities. Let me lay something on you. We're on the verge of what I'm dubbing, heard it here first, hot PJM summer. So what is PJM? It's the regional transmission organization that manages the grid from out east into the Chicago area. And, it's not just PJM, but it's other IS independent system operators and regional transmission organizations like MISO and ERCOT and Southwest Power Pool. They are all predicting historic demand for electricity this summer. And what does that mean for America? Well, hopefully it doesn't mean blackouts or brownouts and a failure to provide power, but what it undoubtedly will mean is higher costs and burdens on the average American consumer. And so we have this incredible proposition, this technology, which sadly, I don't think in the halls of power has risen to the level of awareness and acceptance where it should. But I do think we're on the verge of winning some hearts and minds in Washington. So The reconciliation process did provide a significant benefit in the form of the Inflation Reduction Act. And right now, Congress is in the midst of undergoing and undertaking another endeavor around the reconciliation sort of parliamentary budget making process within Congress. There's a lot of stuff up in the air as to how this is going to play out. And clearly, they're going to be in the habit of picking, as usual, winners and losers. We need to inform and educate Congress, just as we are here today with the attendees of this webinar, about the common sense solution we have in the form of geothermal heating and cooling. We talked on the last webinar about the origin story of this industry, sprang out of the oil and gas industry in Oklahoma in the 70s, was really commercialized and driven to market with the help of the rural electric cooperatives in the 80s and 90s. And has, despite that, always been a bit of a niche heating and cooling solution. We are primed for takeoff, and what we really need as an industry is certainty. Certainty in the tax code, certainty in forward-looking support from our champions and our representatives in Washington. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to get that support, Scott.
That's terrific. Well, I want to, we're going to wrap up. We aim for about 45 minutes or so. And, it's a lot to pack into a compressed amount of time. I think it'd be fun to spend a lot more time with each of you, with all of you, but the good news is we're gonna keep doing this, and so there could be other opportunities to come back together. But I'll say to everyone who made the time to join us, this will be posted, and there'll be opportunities to listen again if you missed something, and then we'll have other materials out as well. But really appreciated such a dynamic conversation around how geothermal heating and cooling can be such a foundational strategy for grid resilience, for utility innovation, and to be able to have Excel Energy, KitsWorks outside the box, and the Geothermal Exchange organization here was really terrific. Everything from thermal energy networks, peak load management, program design and incentives, and of course, Ryan, your stump speech on policy really underscores now's the time. And if folks have questions about what to do or how to engage, Ryan would be the guy. I know there's been a lot of emails being posted, and please rest assured that all the sponsoring organizations will make sure that this group stays informed and up to date, either through existing email addresses or others. And if you want to write a letter to your congressman, contact Ryan. He just posted his email address. And with that, I'll say thanks and take 12 minutes to have a little break before your next meeting, I'm sure. And we'll be back. We'll be back online with the next one in a couple of weeks. Last question here was, where will this be? And we'll send notices around, but I believe it'll be on the GeoVision website, and then it may get repeated elsewhere, and there'll be some social media collateral flying around as well as we go forward. So thanks again, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. See you soon.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, Scott.